interesting process. I'm going to put my stock in the lathe and turn it down to be 9mm thick for the central hub of the propeller. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the headstock of the lathe, 4-jaw headstock, and I'm going to put some marks on it. At this point, be around about there, around about there, around about there. For 5 blades, I'm going to centre it on one, lock it in, and make 2 hacksaw cuts on this. This is what the blades are going to lock into. Then I'm going to rotate it by 1. I'm going to do it all the way around so that we're going to have these nice slots all ready, and I'll have a jig to make sure that's in the same place for both. Okay, so now I've got the slots in place for the blades to fit in. The next step is, I'm just going to do this by eye, but I want to put a little line on here and a little line on here, because that's going to be the back of the stern portion of every blade, because it's actually going to go, I'm going to machine it off like that. So we've got 2 different blades, obviously with different lengths. Now I'm going to need here 10mm, I'm going to need here 9, I'm going to need for the parting, I'm going to need 3, 9, 10 to the end of there, and I want around about 15 on either side. So what does that all add up to? 15, call it 72mm, that's obviously better. So this is going to, I'm going to make it, so what I know now is that this is going to have to be 80 from there to there. Alright, and once I've got that, the next step will be to part it off here. So that's now gone. Now once I've done that, I'm going to set this up in the drill, in the lathe, and put a drill down here to this point here. And I'm going to put a drill down here to this point here. Have to measure that in carefully. Then I'm going to put a tap in the end stock and start to tap a thread in here. Start to tap a thread in there. And then I might take it out and finish it off in the vise. But this at least will make it all nice and straight. Okay, so now we have our threaded section that's quite long, longer than the screw is going to be, but that's completely fine. So the next thing that I'll put that extra part in there so that I've got room to still work with it in the tailstock. I'm going to part these off now, and I've now got I've got the 2 hubs now. They're going to look, each one of them is going to look like this. So how long are they? They're 15, 25, 25, 34 long. And I'm then going to, I think the best way of doing this will be to put them in the chuck like that, and I know if this is where the pointy part is going to be, I know I've got that and I've got that and I've got this little line here. What I want to do is I'm going to trim this back, and I'm going to cut off, that's the width of the tool, so that I've got a little collet, and then I've got the end of the prop properly. Now that little collet, I'm going to drill a hole in it, and that's going to be a lock nut that I can use. But for now, whoop, this is now what I'm left with. So the trick then is simply to reverse this, hold it very carefully just in that 10 and then trim that down to the nice point. And now I have 2 hubs with the grooves on them for the blades. I've got a lock nut for each of them, and that's a pretty good process. I'm going to do that in the lathe. You'll see a bit of this on the video. Have a look at Scuffy as well, parts 8 through to 12. I think it's all about details of making props. Just have a look at them all because they're all there. And okay, that's how we do it. So this is the jig, and I've added 1 extra stand, and this is the brass that I've made, that I've scored in order to make 10 props. In actual fact, I'm going to make 11, just so that 1 is the standard that I'm going to work to. The only way I find to do this is to cut it off in the vise. It's a difficult process to do this. I don't know, maybe I should think about other ways of doing this, maybe a metal cutting blade and a bandsaw, but for now this will do fine. Now I've got this set up in the lathe, and if you look at the Scuffy videos you'll see exactly the same. A piece of aluminium 90-degree angle material I've just locked into the tool stock. The 4-jaw chuck is now, I've marked it, as you can see at the top, that little black mark. I've got marks for every, I can't remember how many degrees it is now, but it's basically, I think I measured that off with a piece of string actually to get that right around the chuck. But as you turn it around, you get all the cuts, as you can see, and that they come up pretty well. And now I'm just turning on the tap, and I'm doing it this way so that I can get this completely square. And here we're just turning off the end piece, which I think from memory is now going to become the collet. In actual fact, I don't use these collets. I find that I don't have enough room because this boat has such minimal space between the prop and the aft hydroplane. I end up giving up on that and don't use these at all. So this is the shape of the blade, and I've copied this using a texter onto all of the others, ground them down in the grinder one by one, and I'm pretty happy with them. You notice that I've scored the line where they're going to be cut off so that it's similar on all of them, and this one now has been polished into the aerofoil shape and filed into the aerofoil shape and finished. And you can see me doing it here. I'll go to a lot more detail on the Scuffy videos about how to make that propeller. This process looks very tedious. It really doesn't take that long, and when you get a nice variation in sandpaper you can really polish these up quite nicely. That flat top, mind you, is actually in the design. It's meant to be there. Just telling you that. You'd never believe it. So I'm now tapping this around a piece of solid round material because this now gives me the nice concave shape that throws the water. And here I've got 5 blades, all tapped, all concave, and now I'm going to cut them off one by one. I prefer to do it all in one go. This is the finished hub. You can see I've got a concave shape in the base of that blade, plus I've ground it down so that it fits into the slot without any problems whatsoever. And that's basically, I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm tapping a 4mm thread onto the top of this 5mm piece of material. I've obviously turned it down. I want you to notice that I do that by moving my whole body around. That might seem a bit strange, but when you're first getting a die to work on a piece of timber, it's important to do that. Once you've finished that process, it becomes a lot easier. And the longer you make the thread, the more likely it is toward the end of the thread to be accurate. It will gradually self-center on the material. So I make threads too long and then cut them off. But you can see here that's looking That's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now I've got the jig ready. I've got my brick with a hole in the middle that's got the shaft running through it. I'm using the vise to hold that at the right level, and this is all a bit of a interesting process, to say the least. Getting these blades in and held by these little arms and doing up the nuts is something you've got to be prepared for. It takes some patience, but I've done it here, and this is looking now, I think, pretty good, minus a couple of other minor adjustments. Once again, look at the Scuffy videos. There's a lot more on there on that, particularly around the silver soldering. I've got the heat on this now, and you'll see that this, I put the heat on the hub obviously because you want the solid material to get hot first. It won't take much at all for those blades to become hot enough. So I'm working away on that, and then as soon as that's hot enough, I put the flux on, which has gone on now, and it's running across that blade. That's not all that good. That's a stainless steel piece of wire that's holding the flux. Now I'm using the actual solder and soldering them one after the other, and it takes the tiniest little touch of the solder. It melts and runs along where the flux has gone into the crack, and it's all pretty easy. That one there was just a bit blobby, so I keep the heat on it until gradually it runs into the crack, and that's pretty good. Now once all of that is done, I've got to say it looks pretty awful. For your interest, dropping it into a glass of vinegar for an hour makes a lot of difference. These look pretty good. They look a bit agricultural, but in fact on this boat they're going to look fine.